think we can all agree that cybersecurity is vital to the health and stability of any organization. And in light of the pandemic, it's becoming a bigger part of business continuity planning. We're going to turn the conversation over to one of our customers, Kevin Storley, the CISO of PricewaterhouseCoopers. Kevin's going to talk to us about how the role of the CISO has evolved, how he creates stability and a sense of control during times of crises, and how he uses Tessian's human layer security platform to do so. Over to you, Kevin and Henry.
Thank you, Kelly, and welcome everybody. As we know, there has been no shortage of uncertainty recently. And with that uncertainty comes some really interesting challenges, whether it be transitioning the entire company onto a remote work setup overnight, having to approve software in hours rather than weeks, or constantly upgrading VDIs to cope with the increased traffic. But as we know, security is one thing that cannot be compromised with all of this change. It becomes more important than ever now to retain control through this uncertainty. And who better to discuss controlling change through uncertainty than Kevin, who oversees security at one of the largest and most prestigious organizations in the world, PwC. Kevin is a hugely experienced security and technology transformation leader, having previously held leadership position at Zurich Insurance before PwC, and I'm sure we're going to learn a lot from him today. So Kevin, to kick us off, it'd be great if you could explain a little bit about your role and how security is structured at PwC.
Sure. So I have actually have two different roles. So I'm actually wearing a technology hat plus a security hat. We structure security over the last 5 years through a transformation program and really kind of developing a global organization at PwC so that we have consistent security controls and how we actually implement security and oversee security throughout 157 different countries. So I would say that we, number one, really kind of consolidated all into one global organization. But we've also designed it so that rather than kind of a regional security model, we've actually developed it into what you would say functional area. So for example, from an engineering architecture perspective to operations to what we consider a CISO role. So we really kind of developed at a global level, but into functional areas.
Really interesting, really interesting. And I'd love to dive a little bit deeper into some of the security angles of that in a sec. Before we start though, on a human-led level, how are the firm, how are the employees of PwC coping with this new landscape and this weird world of work?
Well, I think in general, we've always had a very remote workforce. So I think from a remote working perspective, it's not much different. I think it's just the amount of working at this point in time being not having the ability to go in the office, although that's changed recently. But within, let's say the first 3 months or so, I think it's been really difficult just because there's constant change in the environment with regards to you can do this, you cannot do that, and then obviously having to adapt to a complete remote working, which I think in general is one of the things that we also issue from a PwC kind of work-life balance is it's so easy to work 10 straight hours that we always encourage as you work remotely to make sure that you take some breaks and really kind of build some work-life balance into your routine. But in general, I think from a security perspective, we've adapted fairly well.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think that the intensity of working at home really goes in like peaks and troughs, and people like find their groove as to when they're taking breaks, and that's only complicated with like all of the change that's coming on. But obviously, a way larger scale that you're operating at PwC compared to what we've been operationalizing at Tessian. Going a little bit further into the security fundamentals. I know that PwC have been operating with a distributed workforce for many years now. It's the nature of the business. It's embedded with people working in different offices and customer offices, etc. What are your top tips to the CISOs and security leaders out there today in terms of securing remote employees?
Well, I think it's primarily predicated on two fundamentals. I think number one is obviously the human element. So how do you actually educate your end users on secure practices, such as securing your home network, or if you're traveling as you go to airports or hotels, to make sure that you understand which Wi-Fi, making sure that you use VPN. So I think number one is definitely user education and making sure that they actually employ secure practices. Then obviously the second thing is how do you actually secure the endpoint itself? So how do you secure the mobile devices? How do you secure the laptop environments so that they can securely work through not being in the office. So I think it's those two components as you really kind of deploy a remote working workforce.
And for you guys, has that, I mentioned that you've operated a distributed model for a long time. Has COVID and the new world of working that we have currently changed how you think about those things, or have they been ever present in your security strategy with the transformation you've been going through?
Yeah, they've been pretty ever present. We've definitely, well, what we've done though that's different is over the last few years, really adopted a cloud first model. So rather than having a very data centric infrastructure, we moved it all into the cloud. And I think that actually helped us adapt quite quickly to this working remotely. We scaled up all of our infrastructure overnight. Typically, we had roughly 100,000 people working offsite at any given time globally. Overnight, that scaled up to like 250,000. And so we were able to handle that because of our cloud journey that we're on, which is obviously baked around how we actually implement security as we go to the cloud.
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? Because, someone said to me the other day that the situation that we're in for so many organizations has kind of like put them through transformation that would otherwise have taken many, many years. And I think cloud is one of those where PwC are obviously very forward thinking and ahead of the curve in terms of embracing cloud for an enterprise of your size. But we're certainly seeing the other customers and future customers that we interact with that embracing that cloud really means that you're set up for success when you get dealt with unexpected events such as this. And it kind of infiltrates security as well, because it's not just unexpected events of, now we need however many more environments for people to work from, but it's also more advanced threats and how you can really quickly push a protection to people. Going a little bit deeper on the first element you mentioned, the human element, education, I think you alluded to there, making sure you're equipping employees with the right skill set so they know what Wi-Fi network to connect to, some of the basics that they may encounter when they're out of the office. How have you effectively engaged and educate all of your users globally on such a large scale? And has that been effective? I'd love to hear any learnings that you've had from that.
Yeah, it's always an area that any organization can do better on, and changing human behavior is probably one of the most difficult things that you can do. But we've done a few things. Obviously, number one, I think most organizations have done this, but we really focus on phishing emails. So employing tooling that does the phishing awareness and making sure that if people clicked on a phishing simulated email, that they take the lessons learned from that. We do security awareness days. So for example, when we were in the offices, we would set up shop in all the different offices on security awareness day and really kind of talk to people during their lunch breaks and get them to ask questions, but also educate them on secure practices and obviously give them like gift certificates for doing answering their quizzes properly. So we try to do like a security awareness days and around all of PwC. We've also started things such as what we call security ambassador programs. So we can't be everywhere at any given time. And what we've done is really kind of get security ambassadors in each line of service to really kind of evangelize information security. And so that if they're working in an engagement and somebody has a question, that evangelist or that security ambassador can address it right then and there rather than having to take it all the way back to the security team. So there's lots of different ways that we're kind of thinking through this, but it is let's just say a battle that every day that we have to live through on educating our end users.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of that resonates with what we think about at Tessian. Notably, I think being able to train people in the moment when an event is about to happen that actually affects their data or their email, it really resonates with people and they connect with the fact that you're trying to protect them rather than just impose controls. In terms of security ambassadors and kind of democratizing that slightly throughout the organization, are they members of the security team or are they like senior members of certain teams? How do you select them and kind of like what process do you go through identifying and like reinforcing those security ambassadors?
A lot of it is who we've worked with as we kind of engaged, let's just call it the lines of services within PwC. I think it's across the board. You can go all the way from associates to directors. I don't think we really say, it has to be a certain grade or a certain level. We want this to be people that are really interested in security and understand the value of what we're trying to drive and maybe even see a career in it. So they're not formally part of my organization, but they definitely have shown interest and definitely because of that, we have monthly luncheons, we educate them and really kind of prepare them to help evangelize and discuss cybersecurity.
Great. Thanks, Kevin. Going on to what you see as some of the most pressing risks that you're dealing with at the moment and what's commanding your attention, we'd love to understand what's top of mind for you at the moment.
Sure. I think as part of this COVID crisis, it is an opportunity for threat actors to leverage a crisis situation, right? So one of the biggest things that we've been seeing is supply chain. So it's one thing to protect, for example, PwC, but it's another thing to ensure that your supply chain is also secure. And so we've been seeing more from a supply chain attack and just let's just say security incidents throughout our supply chain. So right now, that's one of the biggest focus areas is ensuring that our supply chain also has adequate security controls so that it doesn't impact PwC.
Yeah, it's something that we're seeing a lot on, amongst our networks as well, which is especially organizations such as PwC or large organizations with many, many suppliers. Attackers are becoming wise to the fact that actually you have very robust security procedures in place, and therefore it's probably a lot easier to infiltrate a supplier and then be able to get into PwC using like a legitimized supplier domain, for example. Account takeover being something that we see quite often on our side. What does that mean for, in your shoes as someone who is protecting security of PwC? You obviously want to enable the business to continue to work with all of the different suppliers. How do you, what does that relationship look like? And, I imagine there's the onboarding, but then also like the ongoing coaching from a security perspective, working with those suppliers.
Yeah. Well, I think it's actually shifted quite a bit within the last 5 years, I would say. Security has become obviously very top of mind. It's always in the news now. I think with GDPR, there's heightened sensitivity with regards to overall security and data protection. So I think when we raised the supply chain concerns, and we started this journey around supply chain probably about 3 years ago at this point, I think everybody was understanding and actually embracing how we need to really consider our supply chain risks. And so I think there are situations where we actually have done due diligence reviews and security reviews and said, well, it's probably not the best idea to use this vendor. And actually the business and the procurement teams all understood why, and we worked towards that. So I think it's shifted quite a bit. Now, if you would have said that 10 years ago, probably a lot different. But recently, I think there's a sentiment change with regards to using supply chain and how you actually secure your supply chain.
Yeah, that's really refreshing to hear. And I sense the same on our side. Certainly security DDQs are no longer such formality or a checkbox. They actually have really meaningful output, which decisions are based on. What about, I guess to some extent, there are always incidents that even the most secure suppliers can fall victim of. What about when you have a supplier that you deem to have a really high level of security, but there is an incident? How do you form relationships with their security teams, help coach them through some of the controls that you're looking at? What does that ongoing relationship look like with approved suppliers?
Sure. Yeah. With the critical suppliers, we definitely want to develop that relationship. And we've done that with obviously some of our key suppliers. And I think as part of that, it's really just a conversation and it's really understanding what they're trying to do to mitigate. I think any organization will fall victim to a security incident. It's just inevitable. But I think it's how you handle those situations and how you learn and remediate and move onwards that's most important. So I think it's number one, as part of any incident, especially in your supply chain, you need to understand the impact to your organization. I think that's step one. But I think as part of that, then really understanding how they're remediating that, how they're avoiding those incidents or that type of similar incident going forward, but then also really understanding how they're also taking a look at securing the rest of the organization and if there's any other improvement areas that they can make and go on that journey with them. And I think that's the right approach, especially, again, if they're a critical supplier. They're not necessarily just a supplier, they're also your partner because you obviously can't operate without them. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And in many respects, you're on that journey together, right? Because when you evaluated that supplier 2 years ago, you may now be thinking about risks which actually were never even, apparent 2 years ago or didn't seem like they would be relevant to the relationship. So I think that relationship is so key and also hopefully helps further like the security postures of both companies. One thing that we really see playing a role in this as well, which is, I think, an exciting emergence within the security technology landscape, at least, is the ability to be able to share, threats that you see on networks with suppliers. So you can say like, hey, actually our systems have flagged these particular risks. You may want to go deeper onto this. Or like a step further, like something that we're now leveraging with our inbound technology is to be able to say, when we see a risk on PwC's network, for example, to be able to irreversibly, hash that risk, anonymize it, and then other people within their network get the benefit of it through using the Tessian platform. So I think there's a really scalable ways of like helping leverage each other's insights and threats that the other parties are seeing. I want to go on slightly in terms of your ethos of security. We spoke about some of the important things to think about, some of the prominent threats and things that are top of mind for you. But when it comes to protecting, frankly, so many users in an organization, why do you think, we often speak about a human-led security mindset, putting the employee first, empowering them to make the right decisions. Why does that become so critical in the landscape that we face ourselves in today?
Well, I think in general, the human aspect of security is the first gating mechanism to a lot of the things that we do, right? I think even if you look at a lot of the large scale breaches, I would say probably 90+% of those has some kind of human element to it, either a phishing attack or sharing of credentials or something, right? So there's always a social engineering aspect to it. So I think how we actually secure and how we actually look at the human layer is one of the most critical things. But in addition to that as well is to be successful as you look upon implementing security change, and if any of the audience members are looking at doing transformation, I mean, one of the biggest things is how do you actually also bring along your organization and bring along your team on the journey, and part of that is also instilling and changing the cultural values, but also how do you get them to believe in the mission and the purpose that you drive, and really kind of make them and understand the criticality and communicate it in such a way that there's business value to it as well. So I think all those things tied together is that human layer. So obviously it's, as we talked about, securing it, but then it's also how do you actually drive a change organization or a change program, and how do you win the hearts and minds of the people to ensure that you are successful on your journey?
Yeah, a lot of that resonates, and I'm sure that I'm sure a lot of the audience will kind of resonate with that as well. I think going on a little bit step further and building what you said, does that mean that the role of the CISO now have essentially become so can instigate, connect with people and show them the direction that they're going in? Because it feels like security strategies can need to pivot so quickly in so many directions that can have consequences on end user behavior change, etc. Is that now a really important part of the CISO, which is internal stakeholder management and inspiring the company to go on that journey with them?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the evolution of where you looked at CISOs from, let's say 15, 20 years ago to what they are today is dramatically changed. I think back in the day, security and how the evolution of the CISO really was back office, right? You would see a lot of CISOs coming from a very technical background, or maybe they came from an audit background, compliance background. But that has really shifted because security has now become such a hot topic and is really top of mind that the function itself either has now reporting changes. It used to be maybe under an IT umbrella. A lot of organizations have shifted the CISO to be reporting to the CEO, COO, CFO, a different kind of organizational to give it a balance outside of just IT and technology. So I think as the elevation of the topic and as the elevation of the role and the function itself changes, the demands of the actual CISO itself has also shifted, right? So going back to your point, it's not just living in the back office and addressing the technical aspects. It really is being a leader and being able to evangelize security, but also using security to drive value. Like for example, as part of the security journey that we went on, being able to scale up our infrastructure from a remote access perspective was part of the journey. If we didn't take that kind of actions, we wouldn't be able to, as we discussed, scale up twofold overnight of all of our workforce going remote. So I think there's benefits that come out of how you do security, but it's how do you actually drive the discussion to get there and then really kind of then execute the strategy, but the change that's really needed, as you're talking about, with the organization, but with the people as well.
Yeah, exactly. And we're definitely seeing a good tailwind in the role of the CISO in the organization. Even, in the last couple of years, working with many CISOs as we do at Tessian, so many now are involved in whether it be pitches to win really big new customers, to, that kind of exec leadership role, which perhaps previously wasn't there, like a flip role within an organization, which is not only protecting the organization, but also a value add and a marketing tool and something that the organization are really proud of their security posture, etc.
Yeah. We've been seeing, even from our perspective, you're absolutely right, is we've been seeing the market and clients' demands, I guess, and what they're asking for, and using security as really a differentiator. So I think security has become one of those defining moments, and again, how you differentiate your positioning in the market with others.
Yeah, super interesting, super interesting. It's certainly a challenging and interesting time to be in security. And I'm afraid to say that we're not going to have enough time to dig into some of those other topics that I would have loved to today. A huge fan of what you're doing over at PwC, Kevin. It's been awesome working with you, but also sharing the session with you today. Really appreciate you taking the time, but unfortunately, that's all we've got time for today. Thank you to everyone at home who tuned in to watch. I hope you found it valuable. I'm now going to hand back to Kelly, who is going to introduce our next session. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Henry and Kevin. There is so much to learn from these sessions, but I've jotted down a few key takeaways that I want to share. 1, it's not just malicious actors that pose a threat to our data security. And as we've heard from our speakers, a majority of the security incidents that they're logging actually involve absent-minded employees or inadvertent errors. So we have to factor that into our security design. Number 2, do not forget your supply chain. After all, you are only as safe as your weakest partner. So you need to go on a security transformation journey with all of your partners to make sure you have a very secure network. Number 3, keep elevating security in your organization. Security drives value, it's a market differentiator, and it's something that your business should be proud of. And it's the role of security leaders to communicate that, especially today.